Hey there! Welcome to this week's message from Centralia Christian Church. We are so glad that you are listening, and we hope this message will encourage and inspire you to walk closer with Jesus. Now sit back, relax, and let's dive into the Word together.
All right, does anybody remember what this past Monday was? Christmas, yes. I know it seems like way longer than just last Monday, but yes, it was Christmas, and now, congratulations, we've made it. We have survived Christmas. All of the presents, the food, the family, the craziness, it's all finally over, right? But I have a sign for you guys to look at that kind of relates to our Christmas. And in case you can't see that, it says winding road next 99 miles. Has anyone here ever seen this sign before? Anybody know where this sign is? See, I grew up in Montana, so I had the privilege of driving by this sign. I actually don't know how many times I've driven past it, but it's been a lot. So this sign is at the top of Lolo Pass as you're headed into Idaho from Montana. And the winding road really does continue for 99 miles. Some of it's 55-mile-an-hour curves, some of it's 25. And it feels every bit of 99 miles long. But when you look at this sign, what might be your first thought? See, for me, my first thought is I cannot wait for that 100th mile. And yes, the 100th mile feels amazing when it's not a curve and it's this straight stretch. You can actually speed up. You're not winding back and forth. No one in your car is threatening to get car sick anymore. It is amazing. But this is sometimes how we treat, really anything in life. It can be whether it's holidays or birthdays or kids or jobs or anything like that. It's really easy to look at these things like we would look at this sign and say, I can't wait till I get to here. I can't wait till I get to the end of it. I can't wait till I have this job. I can't wait till my kids are out of the house. I can't wait for this holiday or for this holiday to be over. I can't wait for that 100th mile. And we sometimes treat Christmas like this too. We just want to get to Christmas Day. And then once Christmas Day is over, we just want to be done with Christmas. By show of hands, how many of you have taken down your Christmas decorations already? Okay, a few of you. Wow, that might even equal the number we saw in first service. And so we spend all of this time decorating, usually like Thanksgiving Day or just before or just after. And then by the time the New Year rolls around, half of us are already done with Christmas and taking everything down. But we don't only do this with Christmas, and so not to stress you out, but here's some upcoming holidays that we have. So tomorrow is New Year's Day, January 1st. On the 15th, we have Martin Luther King Jr. Day. February 2nd is Groundhog's Day. February 12th is Lincoln's birthday. The 14th is Valentine's Day. By the way, my wife came home from Walmart last night with some Valentine's Day themed things, and Valentine's Day, or February 14th, has never felt closer. On the 19th, we have President's Day. Daylight savings comes in at March 10th. St. Patrick's Day on the 17th. Good Friday, March 29th. Easter is March 31st. And then we have April Fool's Day on April 1st. And that is all of the main holidays over the next 3 months. There was something in there about a belly laugh day, but I can neither confirm nor deny that. But what I really want to point out is that Good Friday, which is when we focus on the crucifixion of Jesus, is March 29th. And Easter is March 31st. And those, after Christmas, are the next church-related holidays. The next holidays that focus on Jesus. Not so much Valentine's Day, none of the rest of those. But Good Friday and Easter are the next church holidays. So we spend so much time focusing on Easter. We have focusing on Christmas. We have sermons about Christmas. We start decorating for Christmas by Thanksgiving. We spend all this time focusing on Christmas. We get to Christmas, and then we just put everything away and move on to the next thing. and the next thing, and the thing after that. And as Christmas approaches, we're often thinking about the new year. As New Year approaches, we're moving on to whether it's something in January or all the way up to Valentine's Day. And then next thing you know, we're on to Easter, and then it's on to summer, it's on to vacations, it's on to wherever you go during the summer, and then it's on to Halloween, and then it's Thanksgiving, and then we're right back to Christmas. And it just becomes this weird cycle where you go from Jesus' birth almost straight to his death and resurrection, and then right back around to his birth. As a side note, did you guys know that there are expert opinions on when it is acceptable to take down your Christmas decorations? Apparently, the standard is you should take them down no later than January 5th or January 6th. Something about it corresponding to the 12th day of Christmas. And they say any decorations beyond that is only acceptable if it's not over the top. I'm not really sure what over the top means regarding Christmas decorations, but let's be honest. Whether you believe these so-called experts or not, it is kind of weird to walk into someone's house in the middle of January and see a whole bunch of Christmas decorations still up, isn't it? It's a little weird. Now, if there are any of you who just keep them up year-round, and if I'm offending you at this moment, I sincerely apologize. But I do think that this cycle, where we go from Jesus' birth to his death to his resurrection, and then right back around to his birth, it feels like we're missing something. Because Jesus' birth is really just the next step in this 99-mile-long winding road that starts in Genesis 1. And Jesus' death and resurrection aren't even the ending of the story. But for some reason, these are the only things we focus on, albeit for a very short time. And in fact, something that I think we might be missing is what responding to Jesus looks like. I know that seems kind of weird, saying that we just celebrated the birth of this baby, and now we're talking about responding to this baby? I mean, babies, for the most part, eat and sleep and poop and blow out of their diapers and eat and poop some more. But shortly after the Christmas story, we come across this other story that shows that there's really two main responses to Jesus at any point during his life, and that there have been people responding to Jesus since the moment he was born and even before that. And today our main story will be Matthew 2, verses 13 through 23. And I'll be reading out of the New Living Translation. It is also on the screen if you can read it. I do have a tendency to make the words on the screen a little too small, so I apologize. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother," the angel said. "Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." That night, Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother. And they stayed there until Herod's death. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet. "I called my son out of Egypt." Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. Herod's brutal action fulfilled what God had spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. "A cry was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted, for they are dead." When Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. "Get up," the angel said, "take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child are dead." So Joseph got up and returned to the land of Israel with Jesus and his mother. But when he learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son Archelaus, he was afraid to go there. Then, after being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee. So the family went and lived in a town called Nazareth. This fulfilled what the prophets had said: he will be called a Nazarene. So we have a lot going on in this story. In fact, the events of this story probably take place in, honestly, just a few months, because in the time that Mary and Joseph left for Egypt, it actually wasn't that long until Herod died, and then they came back from Egypt. So all of this is kind of happening in just a few months. And so in this passage, we have some weird prophecies. We have three main characters two main responses. That should be responses, not prophecies. And then we have a partridge and a pear tree. Oh, well, actually, no, I got a little carried away with that. Sorry. It's counting down there. So there are three different prophecies in this passage. And we're just going to cover them really quickly. And the first two, which is where Matthew says the prophecy, I called my son out of Egypt, and then Jeremiah's prophecy about Ramah and Rachel weeping. These both had immediate context and have already actually been fulfilled by this point. They were mainly talking about the nation of Israel. The first one was Israel coming out of Egypt on their way to the promised land. And the second one was about Israel being taken into captivity and how Ramah was a major stop in that deportation. And so both of these prophecies were already fulfilled hundreds of years ago, but Matthew seems to be paralleling Jesus' life with that of the nation of Israel. And this last prophecy, where it says, he will be called a Nazarene. From what I could find and from what I read, this prophecy in these words does not actually appear in the Bible. Instead, it seems to be a summary of what many prophets were saying about Jesus. They were saying how Jesus, he would be despised and rejected. He'd be looked down upon. Well, at that time, if you wanted to be despised and rejected, then you just needed to say you were from the town of Nazareth. See, Nazareth had this rustic community. People there had hillbilly accents. There were large populations of zealots and Gentiles there. And it was pretty much the equivalent of being looked down upon and despised. And that's really all I have for those prophecies this morning. So I want to talk about the main characters that we have in this story. And the first main character, as is true in really any story in the Bible, is God. First, we have Jesus, God's Son, born in the flesh to save us from our sins. At this point in the story, he's about 2 years old. He's a pretty important character, right? But then we also have God who is working and speaking in dreams in the story, mainly to Joseph. And, I've had maybe a couple of dreams in the last 6 months that I believe were from God. But if I could interpret dreams, if I knew how everything about dreams worked, and if I had a ton of personal experience, then maybe I would spend the rest of this morning talking about that. But I can't interpret dreams. I don't know how all of that works, so I'm not going to spend the rest of the morning talking about it. Instead, I'm going to leave you with a few pieces of information about dreams, and then we're going to keep moving. So if you have more experience than I do with dreams, and you would like to share that, I'd be more than happy to talk with you after service. So most vivid dreams happen during REM sleep, or rapid eye movement. By the way, going to bed super late messes with the amount of REM sleep you can get and makes it hard to get that. Most dreams are pictures instead of sounds or movement. And I was thinking back over all the dreams I've had lately, and I can't support or contradict that statement, so I'm not sure. Apparently 12% of people dream in black and white. Eating shortly before bed makes nightmares more likely to happen. And I'm pretty sure I can actually support that one. Most dreams that are connected to events. Anyway, sorry, this quit working for me. There we go. Thank you, John. Most dreams are connected to events that happen in the last day or two. And mainly, no one, especially scientists, know or at least refuse to admit why people dream or what function they were meant to serve. And then God uses dreams fairly often in the Bible to talk with people. I don't know, maybe that's the purpose of dreams. But that's really all I have. So if you'd like to know more about dreams, I would suggest that you go home and do some more research. But there's two things that go along with that. First, if you find anything interesting, please share it with me. And two, please wait until you go home to research dreams. I don't want to see anybody pulling out their phone right now and looking up all kinds of information about dreams in the middle of service. Sound good? Okay. So let's look at the other two main characters that we have this morning. And let's start with Joseph. Now, Joseph is a really interesting main character because we don't know much about him. We know he is a carpenter. He works with wood. We know that he marries Mary. We know he's a descendant of David. He lives in a town called Nazareth. And from Matthew 1, we know that Joseph was a righteous man. And that is pretty much all we know about him. The last we see of him is when Jesus is 12 and gets lost at the temple, and Mary and Joseph come back to Jerusalem and look for him. And that is the last we hear of him. We don't know how he dies or when he dies. We don't know how old he was. Nothing else. It's thought that Joseph probably died before Jesus began his ministry. And based off of some of Jesus' interactions with Mary while he was on the cross, it seems pretty likely that Joseph is at least dead by then. But that's all we know. So how can someone that we know so little about be the main character of this story, or really any story, to be honest? And the reason why Joseph is a main character is because what he accomplishes in the 2 to 3 years that are covered in Matthew 2 is more than most people will probably do in their lifetime. And what Joseph does is he illustrates this first option for responding to Jesus. And I mentioned earlier how responding to Jesus as a baby seems pretty weird, but people have been responding to Jesus since the moment he was born and even before that. And Joseph illustrates the response of faith. Now, faith at its core is belief in God accompanied by action. And I've talked about this before, but there must be action. There must be some evidence that what one believes actually affects their life. But I came across this quote on faith while doing research for this sermon, and it's by a man named Martin Lloyd-Jones. And Martin was a Welsh Protestant minister in the 1900s. He was known for his thorough and effective sermons. In fact, our good friend Martin was so thorough that he wrote a 14-volume commentary on the book of Romans. Yeah, that's a... And so when looking up his biography, I actually came across this exact quote, and I thought it was so interesting, I wanted to put it in here. The quote goes like this: "His sermons would often be around 50 minutes to an hour in length, attracting many students from universities and colleges in London." So Martin preached for an hour every time he spoke, and it was actually considered attractive to college students. There's a rabbit trail that we could probably go down there, but I don't think we have the time to do that today. So Martin Lloyd-Jones says that faith means taking the bare word of God and acting upon it because it is the word of God. It means believing what God says simply and solely because he has said it. That's pretty powerful. So how does Joseph live this out? Well, first of all, he marries Mary. If we look in Matthew 1, we get an account of this, and it says that Joseph, to whom Mary was engaged, was a righteous man and did not want to disgrace her publicly. So he decided to break the engagement quietly. As he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. "Joseph, son of David," the angel said, "do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. For the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary as his wife. Isn't that pretty incredible? Joseph is engaged to this woman who ends up pregnant, and it's not his fault, and he's going to divorce her. And then this angel comes in a dream, and Joseph immediately obeys. He had the faith to accept what God said and to act on it. Following that, Joseph and Mary end up moving to Bethlehem from Nazareth. It starts because of a census, but 2 years later, they're still there. I don't know much about Roman censuses, but I'm not sure that they last for 2 years. Joseph also becomes the father of a kid who isn't his. I mean, imagine if he had resented Jesus for not being his own son, but Joseph doesn't do that. Instead, he marries a pregnant girl who has a kid that wasn't his, and he loves both of them because God tells him to. Faith. But as if all of that weren't enough, it doesn't even stop there. It gets even crazier. Because after the wise men visit Jesus, which from what we can tell was Jesus is about 2 years old at that point, Joseph receives another dream from God saying to go to Egypt because Herod is trying to kill Jesus. And look at what it says in Matthew 2:14. It says, that night Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother. Now maybe this says more about me than it does about Joseph, but man, if I had that dream, I'm not sure I would have left that night. I mean, was it a crazy dream? Was it a nightmare? Did I have too much food right before bed? Is Mary going to kill me if I suggest this? But no, Joseph takes Mary and Joseph and leaves that night. Faith. By the way, have any of you ever had the pleasure of road tripping with a 2-year-old? Okay, it is an experience. I personally have a 2-year-old at the moment. If you don't have snacks, and if you don't stop often, he will let you know. If you haven't done it, I recommend you try it sometime. It's a great patience builder. So then Joseph brings Mary and Jesus back from Egypt because of another dream from God. And then after yet another dream, Joseph moves to Nazareth instead of going back to Bethlehem. Faith. By the way, I think Joseph might have set a world record for most dreams from God in a 2-year time span. But anyway, that is the last we hear of Joseph. After he and Mary search for Jesus at the temple, nothing. He disappears from the story. I think maybe that is the most remarkable part of Joseph's faith, is that he was able to do all this stuff. He had all of these dreams and acted on them immediately, and then just fades out of the story. The ability to do all of that and then just fade out is actually kind of impressive. But there is one more character we need to talk about in this story, and that's King Herod. Now, we have a lot more information about King Herod than we did about Joseph. And most of the information is kind of disturbing. It's not pretty. King Herod was a power-hungry, paranoid man, and he sure acted like it. Herod started as a tetrarch of Judea, and what a tetrarch is it's one of 4 rulers of an area. So you think of like the area of Judea and some of the surrounding area divided up in fourths, and Herod got one part of it. But he eventually got the other 3 parts as well and became king of the whole area. And he really did this through his talent of gaining power and to basically undermine the people around him. And then if there was any opposition in these areas, he would sweep through and kill anyone who opposed him before they could get organized. And he would wipe out as many people as stood in his way as necessary. He did that over and over. He also, as best I could count, had 5 wives and 7 sons. I mean, after it got past 1 wife, I had a hard time keeping track of everybody. But he ended up killing 3 of his sons and 1 of his wives. 1 son because the son tried to kill him, so he just had the son killed. And then the other 2 sons and the wife were simply because they were from a bloodline that he later saw as a threat. So he ended the bloodline, including his 2 sons and his wife. Herod's main motivations in life were building power for himself and sending tribute to Rome to help himself gain more power. He liked building grand buildings as a tribute to Rome, and the Jewish temple was actually one of those buildings. And he would make sure that he had plenty of money to send to Rome, no matter how hard the Jewish people had to work for it. He finally died of an incurable disease. Now, no one really knows exactly what this disease was, but it slowly ended his life over several years, and according to one commentary, left his body ulcerated and putrefied. Not entirely sure what that looks like, but it's not pretty, I'm sure of that. He was a horribly mean and cruel man who died a horribly painful death. And then if we rewind to Matthew 2, verses 1 through 8, we get one more look at who Herod was. And if you were here last week, this passage is going to sound familiar to you. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I too can worship him." Now, in case it's not obvious, Herod never planned to worship Jesus. And the wise men didn't come back, and Herod had some kids killed over it. But look at what verse 3 says. It says, Herod was deeply disturbed. And this idea of disturbed is like roiling water. And it's the same word for terrified. It wasn't that Herod thought Jesus was some inconvenience. He was so afraid of Jesus that it shook his entire life, his entire kingdom, like roiling water. And when the wise men never came back, Herod felt outwitted and he was furious. This idea of outwitted is the same idea. He sent soldiers to kill all of the boys in Bethlehem that were 2 years old and younger. Reports vary on how many kids this actually was, but it was somewhere around 20 boys that were killed as a result. Now, that's not like a crazy, crazy huge amount of kids, but 20 families had their kids killed and were forever affected simply because Herod was afraid of Jesus. Interestingly, though, there's actually no record outside of the Bible of this slaughter in Bethlehem actually happening, which has led some people to ask if it actually happened. And the answer is that yes, it most likely did happen. And the reason behind this is because compared to everything else King Herod did, having 20 boys killed in this little town called Bethlehem probably wasn't all that noteworthy. Yes, 20 kids is a horrible, horrible amount of people to kill. But the amount of people that Herod had killed at other times, simply because he suspected them of something, 20 kids is not a large number. And so it's most likely that none of the other historians record this because 20 kids, in light of the thousands of other people Herod had killed, really wasn't that big of a deal. By the way, if you aren't sure that Herod would even be capable of something like this, did you know that shortly before his death, he had all of the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem rounded up and held captive? And the reason he did this is he ordered that when he died, all of the Jewish leaders were to be executed. And this was important to him because he wanted to make sure that on the day of his death, the Jewish people would have something to mourn about. It's a pretty messed up dude. Now, this didn't actually happen, but just imagining him wanting to, he ordered it, but the people after him refused to carry it out once he died. So Herod finally died after ruling for 37 years. And when he died, his kingdom was divided among 3 of his still living sons. And this is actually important to the story because it explains why Mary and Joseph go back to Nazareth. You see, Herod's sons were Philip, Herod Antipas, and Herod Archelaus. Herod Antipas was, in Herod's will, supposed to rule over Judea, with Herod Archelaus ruling over Galilee. But on his deathbed, Herod had it switched So Herod Antipas ended up in Galilee, and Herod Archelaus ruled Judea. And Herod Archelaus was the most violent of Herod's sons, to the point that shortly after gaining power, he killed 3,000 people he saw as a threat in front of the Jewish temple. And so this is why Joseph did not want to go back to Bethlehem. It was because Archelaus was really no better than King Herod. Actual side note, Archelaus was exiled by Rome after 3 months of ruling, and that is actually how Pontius Pilate enters the story. We see him as Jesus is on trial before his crucifixion. And so Herod embodies the other option for responding to Jesus. Joseph illustrates faith, but King Herod illustrates fear. And so if you look up fear in the dictionary, you'll find something like this: an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger, reason for alarm. It's fairly complex and fairly vague, but there are quite a few different words for fear in the Bible. Now, we don't have time to run through all of these words today, or you guys might start accusing me of being Martin Lloyd-Jones. So I'm just going to give you a couple of the words. Main word for fear in the New Testament is phobos, and it means panic or fright. And it's the word used to describe Mary when the angel visits her, or Peter when he walks on water and gets separated from Jesus. And I personally have some experience with this idea of phobos multiple times, but there's this one time in particular that stands out to me. I was probably about 15 or 16, and it was my first time on a stage speaking in front of people. One of the men in my home church asked me to fill in for him, giving a communion meditation. And I was fine until I started walking up to that stage. At that point, my legs started shaking. And I don't mean like slightly trembling. I mean like shaking. Like you could see it. And I had a hard time focusing on my thoughts. I made it up the 2 steps to the stage. And thankfully, the podium at the top was one of those old-fashioned wooden ones that goes all the way down to the floor. So when you're standing behind it, no one in front of you can see your legs, which was a good thing because mine were shaking so hard that I was gripping onto the podium trying not to fall over. And so I managed to make it through this communion meditation. And I still had 2 steps to go to get down off that stage, and I thought I wasn't going to make it. I was convinced that I would become the first person in the history of communion meditations to work on getting off a stage and fall over on the way down. But I actually made it down off the stage and staggered back to my seat and sat down and did not move until my legs quit trembling. But whenever I hear the word fear, that is the kind of reaction I think of. You're so afraid of something, your legs start trembling, it's hard to think, and you just want out of there, but at the same time, you can't walk. Another word for fear is, actually, the Greek word is deilia, and it more accurately means cowardice. It's the trait of lacking the quality of spirit that enables you to face danger or pain without showing fear. And this is basically how Herod responds to the news of Jesus' birth. He thought he was going to lose his kingdom. So rather than see how it would all play out, he did everything he could immediately to eliminate this threat. He didn't want to have to face this threat, so he tried to kill him. Perhaps the best way that Herod's response could be summed up, and this isn't my own words, but it can be summed up like this. Herod thought Jesus came to take, and in his fear, he tried to take from Jesus before Jesus could take from him. Herod, in his fear, tried to take and take and take. But Joseph, in his faith, gave and he gave and he gave. So what does all of this mean for us? Now, it'd be pretty simple if there were people among us facing the exact same situation that Joseph was, or if there were people here who were modern-day King Herods, but the likelihood of that is not high. So what does all of this mean for us today? Well, just like Joseph and Herod, I would say that today we still have two main options about how we respond to God, about how we respond to Jesus. And trust me, all of us respond. Even if we go about Christmas focusing on the distractions that Brad spent the last 4 weeks warning us about, even if as soon as Christmas is over, we pack it all away and move on to the next thing in life and the next thing and the next thing, we all still respond to Jesus. And maybe you even think that only two options for responding to Jesus is oversimplifying it. You might even be right. But from what I have found, the various responses that people can give to Jesus really, at the end of the day, boil down to faith or fear. So let's start with faith. Let's start with it's actually working again. Let's start with the good news first. What does responding to Jesus in faith look like for us today? First, responding to Jesus in faith means doing what he says when he says it. When God or an angel talked to Joseph in a dream, when Joseph woke up, he did what he was asked to do. He didn't procrastinate. He didn't make a list of pros and cons. He didn't check and see if he was having a nightmare. When God told him to do something, he did it right away. I mean, if he didn't marry Mary right away, if he, I'm going to wait a few months before I decide if that was actually what God wanted me to do, would Mary have ended up in Bethlehem? If Joseph didn't leave for Egypt right away, would Herod have caught up to them? Or if he never came back from Egypt, then would Jesus have been an Egyptian and not a Nazarene? It's kind of weird to think about, but my point is that Joseph did what God called him to do as soon as God told him to do it. So when God tells us to do something, whether it's through a dream or the Bible or someone else, we need to do it. Not drag our feet or procrastinate. We need to do it. Second, responding to Jesus in faith means listening for God's word. Saying that we will do whatever God wants us to do doesn't really mean much if we don't leave any room to hear God speak. It would be about as effective as me saying, "Hey, Lane, whenever you need something, I'm right here for you, man. Just call me, text me, anytime, I'm there." And then as soon as I walk away, I block his number so he can't call me or he can't text me. Well, if he ever needs me, I'm unavailable. And that's kind of the same thing that we do to God sometimes, where we say that we want to obey God, we want to listen to his word, and then we leave absolutely no room for quiet, for the ability to actually sit and listen to God. We fill our time with social media or our hobbies, or we're rushing from one holiday to the next or one thing to the next, and we rarely create space in our lives to hear God. But we need that space if we actually do want to hear God and to listen to him and act on it. Third, responding to Jesus in faith means that we might have to do something that we don't want to do. Maybe that doesn't sound too crazy at first. I mean, maybe you're thinking, yeah, well, Nate, I had to clean my room when my parents told me to, and I didn't want to do that, but hey, I'm still alive. Okay, I get that, but look at this from Joseph's perspective. He had to marry a girl who was already pregnant. It wasn't his fault. He had to drag that 9-month pregnant woman off to Bethlehem for a census. Then he dragged his wife and his 2-year-old child on a road trip to Egypt just to bring them right back a few months later, and then move home to Nazareth, where there were surely still some questions about Mary getting pregnant in the first place. Do we really think Joseph wanted to actually do any of that? Probably not. But he did it because God asked him to, and he also did it right away. So sometimes following God means doing things that we might not actually want to do. Finally, responding to Jesus in faith might mean that we're not actually remembered for what we do. How many of us here today would like to be remembered for something at the end of our life? For anything? Okay? Well, I kind of would too. But look at Joseph. The things he did were more impressive than many people will ever do in their entire life. And then he quite literally disappears from the story. There's no epic conclusion to his life. There's no majestic tombstone. He's just gone. And responding to Jesus in faith might not grant us recognition, might not grant us prestige, or even a grand tombstone. In fact, Joseph might have been labeled as the guy who married the girl who got pregnant when she wasn't married. But just because we might not get these things, does that mean that we shouldn't do what God asks us to do? No. Even if we won't be remembered for it, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So that's the good news. That's what responding to Jesus in faith looks like. But what does responding to Jesus in fear look like? Let's go with the bad news now. First, it could look like trying to cut Jesus out of our lives completely. This is the approach King Herod took. He tried to take Jesus out for good. It didn't work, but he wanted nothing to do with Jesus. And this is the most obvious way to respond, trying to cut Jesus out of our lives completely to make sure that we have nothing to do with him. It could be fading out of church, ghosting the people in your small group, or just making sure that we're not engaged with the people, with church or the Bible or fellow believers in any way. It can be responding to Jesus in fear. Second, responding to Jesus in fear can look like, I'll just keep my options open. You know why most people want to keep their options open, whether it's a job or a decision or a spouse or even Jesus? It's usually because they're afraid of something. Afraid of being hurt. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of failing. Afraid of giving something up that they don't want to lose. But trying to make no decision about Jesus is actually still making a decision because there is no middle ground. Trying to avoid choosing Jesus is actually choosing to not be with Jesus. Third, responding to Jesus in fear looks like trying to keep God out of specific parts of our lives. And as Christians, this might be the most common response. God, I want you to be Lord of my life, but you can't have this part. God, I surrender everything to you except this habit, except this addiction, this person, this influence, this thing that I want. Don't take that. By the way, holding on to an addiction or a habit or a person or influence or something that drags us away from God, there is a name for that in the Bible. They're called idols. And we are called to get rid of them from our lives, not be afraid that God will take them. Finally, responding to Jesus in fear looks like being afraid of what you think he will take rather than what he will give. Rather than welcoming what he will give. Herod was afraid that Jesus would take his power, his kingdom. What are we afraid that Jesus might take? Our comfort? Our power? Our money? Are we afraid that maybe he'll ask us to help somewhere at church we're not comfortable with? Or maybe that he'll ask us to move somewhere we don't want to go? What are we afraid of? Or maybe this. Have any of you, by show of hands, ever heard someone say, "Oh, don't pray to God for that, he might answer"? Anyone ever heard that? Okay. Have any of you ever said that? Don't pray to God for patience, he just might answer. Don't pray to God for self-control, he might answer. Why are we afraid to ask God for these things? Because we're scared of what might happen. We're scared that God's answer looks like something we don't want. Well, maybe we should be willing to pray those dangerous prayers. Say, God, help me with this. And yeah, maybe it won't look like what we want, but guess what? Sometimes we have to do stuff we don't want to do. If we spend the rest of our lives afraid that saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or even thinking the wrong thing or worse, even praying the wrong thing means that Jesus will take something from us that we want, then we either need to change how we look at God or we hold the wrong things in our lives as important. So where do we go from here? Well, first, I would encourage us to check our focus. Are we continually looking ahead in life, saying, I just have to get here, and then everything will be okay? I just have to get to this job or this holiday, this birthday. I just have to get till my kids are out of the house. I just have to get to that 100th mile, and everything will be okay. Or are we focused on making the most of where we are at now? Second, what is your current response to Jesus? Are you responding to Jesus in fear? Are you afraid of what he could take from your life? Or are you responding in faith, believing that he will actually give what you need? And if your response is fear, I would encourage you to get to the bottom of that. What are you afraid of? How long have you been afraid of it? Is there something in your life right now that is trying to pull you away from Jesus? And I would encourage you to either have this discussion or share the results of it with someone you trust. Because they can support you, they can encourage you, but most importantly, they will hold you accountable. And finally, what is God asking you to do right now? And if you know it, if you know what God is asking you to do, what are you doing about it? What are you going to do about it? And if you don't know what God is asking you to do, are you too busy to hear what God is saying in your life? Are there some distractions that maybe you need to set aside to give yourself room to even hear God? As the worship team begins to come up, I want to leave you with this. Life is busy. The world is busy. We move from one holiday to the next holiday to the next thing in the blink of an eye. It's always easy to look to the next thing, to look to that 100th mile. I just have to get here. But despite all of this busyness, each of us still has to choose how we respond to Jesus. We can choose to respond in fear. We can be afraid of what he might take. Or we can respond in faith. We can welcome what Jesus offers to give to us. But listen to what King David says in Psalms 19 in verses 7 through 11. I think this is a fitting way to end the message today. The instructions of the Lord are perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The commandments of the Lord are right, bringing joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are clear, giving insight for living. Reverence for the Lord is pure, lasting forever. The laws of the Lord are true, each one is fair. They are more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. They are sweeter than honey, even honey dripping from the comb. God, thank you.
We would like to thank you for spending part of your day here with us. Our mission here at Centralia Christian Church is to help people build full-time relationships with Jesus. If you would like more info on the ministry or giving opportunities, visit us online at www.centraliachristian.org.